Okay, we're talking about domain and range. This is probably the hardest part of today's. That's why I'm doing a little 2-minute session on domain and range. Let's say I had a function that looks like this. This is the absolute value function. Kind of looks like a V. And the absolute value is y equals absolute value of x. Again, it's kind of a V shape as opposed to the U shape that you had for the parabola. All right. Now, if I wanted to test if this was a real function, do you remember that test? It was the vertical what? Vertical line test, okay? This is a function because it passes the vertical line test. Here's a vertical line, and I can run it through, and it'll never touch more than once. Okay, that's a topic we need to remember. All right, so now that I've got this tested, it is a function. Now, I'm going to do a quick domain and range for it. Domain are the x's, and that means how far left and how far right is this thing going. Remember, x is this way. And so if you're talking about domain, it's how far to the left will this thing go, comma, how far to the right will it go. So the domain is from something to something. How far, if I extend this function out forever, how far to the left, not up, but how far to the left will it go? Infinity. Is that infinity or is that negative infinity when you're going way to the left? Negative infinity. Okay, that's negative infinity. How far to the right will it be going? Not how far up, but how far to the right. How far this way will that thing go? Infinity. So the domain is from negative infinity to positive infinity. Is that true for every function? No. You have to look at each function and you have to say, how far to the left will it go? How far to the right? So I want you to actually write that down. How far left? And then the other side is how far right does it go? Same idea for the range. The question you're asking is how far down does the function go, comma, how far up does it go? All right? How far down does this v function go? Well, it hits 0. That's the lowest it ever goes. So it goes from 0 to how far up does it go? Well, when you follow this thing this way, it's also going up. It'll go all the way up to the furthest it can go, which is what? Infinity. So this is from 0 to infinity. Then the last thing you need to know is that when you're doing a domain and range, besides going down and up and having the parentheses and everything, some of them are brackets. If it can ever be that number, like 0, can it touch 0? Yes, my function touches 0. So then you put a bracket on the 0. So this is actually from 0 to infinity with a bracket on the 0. Okay, that's a typical domain and range question. One more example. This is a little longer video, but I really want to get this across. Let's say I have a graph of an absolute, not an absolute value, a square root function, and it looks like that. Then that graph's domain is how far left to how far right. How far left does it go? Furthest left it ever goes? 0. How far to the right would this thing go if it continues that way? Infinity. Now it stops right there. It doesn't have an arrow on it. That's important to know. Okay, and then how about the range? The range is how far up and down. And you always start with how far down because the first number needs to be the lowest that it goes. The lowest it goes is 0. Good. What's the highest that this thing goes? Infinity. Now, can it touch 0? Is it touching 0 right here? Yeah. So it's a bracket there. Can you ever touch infinity? No, because as soon as you get there, it wasn't really infinity. You could add 1 to it, and now it's more. You know what I mean? Infinity is a concept, so you need a parentheses around all your infinities. Did it touch this 0 here? Yes, so also a bracket there. All right, so there's an example of doing domain and range for functions.